about Juliet's age in Romeo and Juliet, saying that Shakespeare always intended for the fact that she...
I had a friend send this to me and ask me my take on it, and so I not only wanted to reinforce these two creators' points, but also add some more. Both of those creators essentially make the argument that Shakespeare wants us to know that Juliet is too young to be married, and then the second creator adds on and says something about how Romeo is a little bit fickle, and that's kind of the intention. There's just absolutely no reason to mention the fact that he's in love with an entirely different woman at the start of the play otherwise. So, I have a master's degree in Shakespeare. I love Romeo and Juliet, and I just want to add a couple of other things about this play particularly that I think are really interesting that get kind of caught up in common misconceptions. One, when we're thinking about Shakespeare and time period, I think a lot of our conceptions of what Shakespeare is actually rooted in what the Victorians interpreted Shakespeare as and how they decided to present him, and not necessarily Shakespeare in his own time. As the creator I Stitch mentioned, they would often remove all references to Rosalind because they don't want Romeo to seem immoral. And that would happen in plays like that all the time, where they would kind of recontextualize the play for their own much more conservative society in a lot of ways, because they took on Shakespeare as their own, and they kind of made up this whole poet in the tower thing. Shakespeare was not working alone. He was the writer of the plays, but he was writing the plays for his specific theater troupe, and it was a little bit more devised theater than people think of him sitting alone writing all those plays, right? A lot of people also think that Shakespeare bringing up Juliet's age means that 13 was the age that people got married back then. That's not true. People actually tended to get married, even back in olden times, in their late teens and through their 20s. The ages of marriages really haven't changed too much. The biggest difference is that people are having babies later because of contraception, which they did not have. That's the biggest difference. The only time in which people would be getting married that young were political and allegiant marriages. So what Shakespeare is actually doing, particularly when he's comparing Juliet to her mother, who is saying that she got married that young, he's critiquing the noble tradition of marrying off children as, like, allegiances and for wealth. And again, even for that tradition, 13 is remarkably young. The fact that Juliet is supposed to be marrying Paris, who's, like, supposedly somewhere in his 20s, late teens at the youngest, it's supposed to be critiqued. The other thing I wanted to talk about that this creator touched on that I wanted to expand on was Romeo being in love with Rosalind at the beginning of the play. So yeah, Romeo's a little bit of a fuckboy. He falls in love with every girl he sees. He's a romantic. He's a soft boy, a lover boy, if you will. However, that doesn't make him a villain. That makes him a teenage boy. And yeah, maybe he does some screwed up stuff as teenage boys are wont to do. It shouldn't lead to his death. That's the point of the play. Juliet is young. Romeo is young. They're doing what teenagers do. Okay? They're going after what they're not supposed to go after because they're teenagers. Importantly, also, by the way, Juliet is 13 years old, yes. She also wants to have sex. She wants to kiss boys. She wants to do that stuff. Her society and her parents are telling her she cannot. They are keeping her locked up. That is the tragedy. The fact that these teenagers had no support systems, no one helping them, the fact that they felt so caught up in this that they end up themselves, that's the tragedy. Two households, both alike in dignity. That is the point. Teenagers are supposed to make stupid decisions, right? Their frontal lobes are not developed yet. That's what they do. The point is that Juliet's parents put her in a position where she felt like she had to flee and run away somehow, and she's living in a society where she literally cannot do that without a man. The point is that Romeo was told, you can't interact with this entire family, and we don't have a good reason for you, and he is a 17 to 19-year-old boy, right? Who is like, well, I want to do what I want to do. And then they have these strong feelings for each other, and the fact that they have no one who can help them or they can go to about it is what leads to where they lead to. Romeo and Juliet is not a tragic love story, right? It takes place over 3 days. Do I think that Romeo and Juliet believe that they were in love? Sure, because they were 13 and somewhere between 15 and 19. But that tragedy of that play is not about romance. It's about youth, and it's about society, and it's about parental figures. Like, Juliet being put in a position where she's being married off that young is actually what causes her death. She doesn't want to marry Paris, and that's why she dies. And you also need to remember, at the point in time in which they both, themselves, they've slept together. Which is a huge deal. Like, they're married, right? But they got married in secret and they slept together. So when Romeo finds Juliet dead, the social consequences that he would face are also much bigger than we think of them today. The problem with Romeo and Juliet, the tragedy, is that you took two teenagers and put them in a situation where they felt like their only choice was to themselves. That's it. Romeo's been banished from the only city he knows where his entire family is, and then the one person who was going to come join him he thinks is dead now. What is he going to do? You're 17. What do you do? Another thing I just wanted to note on quickly that this other creator touched on is that there's like this really funny moment in the play where Romeo goes to his friends and he's like, guys, I fell in love. And they're like, with Rosalind, we know. And she's like, no, different girl. And that's a funny moment. Romeo and Juliet, I believe, and my professors in my master's degree believe, it's structured like a comedy up into Act 3. Mercutio is the comedic character. He dies. We're in a tragedy. Anyway, if you've ever taken any like de-escalation training or anything like that, or if you've ever worked with teenagers, I think looking at Romeo and Juliet from that perspective of this is a bunch of teenagers during a hot summer who are given swords, license to kill, and freedom to do what they want, but also no freedom at all, the play makes a lot more sense. Anyway, I don't necessarily believe in like completely 100% honoring Shakespeare's intentions, because at the end of the day, we will never know what Shakespeare's intentions were. He has been dead for 400 years. But if we put our thinking caps on and use our literary criticism, we can kind of see pretty clearly how that play is laid out and what it is actually critiquing about society, because it's not critiquing teenagers themselves. And please, please remember when it comes to Shakespeare that you are reading a play. It is not historical fact. It's made up. That's fiction. And it doesn't actually give you that much insight into what the day-to-day lives of the Tudors were like. So if you want to know more about that, I can give you a reading list. But the Shakespeare plays themselves are not where you need to go if you want to know what Tudor history is actually like. Especially not the history plays, because they're not correct. And also remember that when Shakespeare is setting a play in a place like Italy, that he probably hasn't been there, and that he's probably critiquing English society and setting it in Italy so that nobody can say that he is.